The night was a nightmare, a swirling abyss of darkness that seemed to devour everything in its path. My fingers trembled on the steering wheel, the only anchor in a world that had descended into madness. The road stretched endlessly before me, a serpentine strip of asphalt that disappeared into an abyss of shadows. I had no choice but to keep driving. My phone had buzzed with a call from my sister, and her voice had been a frantic whisper in the dark. She was stranded in the middle of nowhere, and she needed my help. There was desperation in her voice that I couldn't ignore, even though every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to avoid the night. As my headlights cut through the inky blackness, I couldn't help but feel like an intruder in a world that didn't belong to me. The trees on either side of the road loomed like spectral sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky as if trying to escape some hidden horror. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the eerie rustling of leaves and the occasional distant cry of an owl. I glanced at my phone, the screen glowing with my sister's text messages. "Hurry," she had written, followed by, "I can hear something in the woods." Dread twisted in my gut, but I couldn't leave her out there alone. As I rounded a curve in the road, my headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the highway. My heart lurched, and I slammed on the brakes. It was a woman, her back turned to me, her long hair flowing like a dark river down her back. "Please," I muttered under my breath, my voice trembling. "Not again." I had heard stories of the woman in white, a ghostly figure said to haunt lonely roads at night. She was said to be a harbinger of death, appearing to those who were destined to meet a grisly end. I had always dismissed such tales as superstition, but now, confronted with this eerie apparition, doubt crept in. I honked my horn, hoping to rouse her from her trance-like state, but she didn't move. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped out of the car and approached her cautiously. "Hey," I called out, my voice quivering. "Are you okay?" No response. I reached out to touch her shoulder, and she slowly turned to face me. Her eyes were hollow, empty sockets that seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a guttural, otherworldly sound emerged. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, my heart racing. I needed to get away from her, from this nightmare, but the road was too narrow, and there was no way to drive around her. In a desperate act, I managed to lift her and carry her to the passenger seat of my car. She sat there, still and silent, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. I sped down the road, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The minutes stretched into an eternity as I drove deeper into the heart of darkness. My sister's texts became increasingly frantic, each message more disturbing than the last. "It's getting closer," she wrote. "Don't let it catch us." I glanced over at the woman in the passenger seat, but she offered no guidance, no answers. Her presence in my car was a chilling reminder of the unknown horrors that lurked in the night. The road seemed to warp and twist, the trees closing in around me like malevolent specters. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer on the highway I had started on, that we had been transported to some nightmarish realm. Finally, I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop in front of an ancient, dilapidated mansion. Its windows were shattered, and the walls seemed to ooze with malevolence. The place exuded a sense of foreboding that chilled me to the bone. The woman in the passenger seat turned to me, her empty eyes locking onto mine. "We're here," she whispered. I was about to ask where here was when the world around me shifted. The mansion seemed to stretch and contort, its walls twisting and writhing like a living creature. The night grew darker, and the forest closed in, suffocating me. Inside the mansion, the air was heavy with dread. Whispers filled the air, and the walls seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. I followed the woman through a labyrinth of corridors, each one more horrifying than the last. Finally, we reached a room at the end of a long, narrow hallway. The door creaked open to reveal a scene of unimaginable horror. My sister lay on a rotting bed, her body contorted in pain, her eyes wide with terror. I rushed to her side, but it was too late. She was gone, her lifeless gaze staring into the abyss. I turned to the woman, my grief turning to rage. "What have you done to her?" The woman didn't answer, but instead, her empty eyes locked onto mine once more. In a voice that sent shivers down my spine, she whispered, "You were meant to be here." Before I could react, darkness enveloped me, and I felt myself being pulled into an abyss of eternal horror. And that's when I woke up.